Live. Welcome everyone to another Street Entrepreneurs Workshop. Today we have here with us today, Andy. Andy, say hi.
Hi, great to meet you.
So Andy is going to be teaching a workshop titled He, She, They Who Fishes Well, Who Uses a Golden Hook. Lessons in Building Great Products. Andy, is it fair to say that you are the guy who gets called when companies are struggling?
Yeah, I get called at one of two times. Either I get called when things are great and they've just raised some money, or they're ready to, start building and everyone's enthusiastic and they've got lots of new ideas and there's lots of excitement. That's one of the times when people call me and they say, can you come in and help and join the team and just help us build the business and build the product. But I also get the calls when, as you suggested, things haven't gone so well. And in fact, I get more of those calls these days, where maybe they're running out of money, people aren't buying the product, the love for the product isn't there that they expected to be there, the sales aren't there, and hell, we need to figure out what to do.
Awesome. So I'm so happy you're here with us today, and you're going to share your knowledge on what not to do and what to do. So I'm going to go ahead and share your presentation, and you can start whenever you like.
Sure, thanks, Juliana. Well, listen, great to meet everyone. I wish I was in person with you all, but we're using a streaming service, which is still pretty exciting. So just a bit of background. If you haven't already figured it out, I am British. I'm from London originally, but I moved to the US in 2008, moved to Washington, DC. And in fact, I came over here to build a product company. I had a company in London. We'd grown pretty big. We wanted to come into the US. We figured it made most sense to come to DC. It was a health technology company. In 2008 was the beginning of the attempt to reform healthcare in the US. So I moved here with some colleagues and we hired some people and I stayed basically. Currently, I'm a product at ProductSavvy and we're a product strategy company. And as I mentioned earlier, we get involved a couple of key points in a kind of company's life cycle, either very early when they've raised their first venture capital, or they're in a position where they can really start to, put the foot on the gas with building the product and need a good strategy to underpin that. Or, and increasingly this is the case for me personally, when things haven't been going so well and, the hockey stick in the business plan, the chart that went, from lower left to upper right doesn't quite look like that. And when you do the root cause analysis, often you'll find, particularly in technology companies, there's some kind of product issue, some kind of issue that's happened along the way that means the product isn't resonating with the audience, the value isn't being perceived or isn't being realized more often, and we need to figure it out pretty quickly. My focus is mainly on tech products, mainly software, but I've been involved in all kinds of other things, including hardware, including non-technology products. So I'm happy to take questions and talk to people about any of those areas. Professionally and even in my spare time, I'm really interested in innovation and startups. As I mentioned, I've done a work in healthcare, done a lot of work in education-related technologies, social impact. One of the things that probably I've been more focused on is where kind of policy and technology kind of come together, which is partly why I ended up, I guess, in Washington, DC, as opposed to New York or Silicon Valley or somewhere like that. But the startups I work with, I mean, they're all over the map. They're cloud, they're software service, SaaS companies, they're consumer, they're enterprise. I've done lots and lots and lots of product companies. And outside of work, you'll usually find me on a bike. I'm a pretty keen cyclist, love cycling everywhere I can, particularly over these, summer months. It's been great. Big time music lover, as many of us Brits are, although not much live music these days, unfortunately. And I'm definitely happiest when not locked down. This COVID lockdown thing definitely does not suit me. I like to be out and about. And in fact, I was talking to Juliana earlier. That's actually a picture of me about 10 days ago in Colorado, where my son and I did a big camping trip. And in the mountains, out hiking, biking, camping is my kind of thing. So what I thought I would do is kind of talk about some best practices. And I'm really, really happy to take questions on challenges or other issues. But I want to talk really and provide a framework that probably is quite common to you. So when you're thinking about building products, there's some great books and some great YouTube videos and a lot of good resources on design thinking and thinking, as a designer when you're thinking about your product. And there's these great methodologies like Agile and Lean, and there's all kinds of things out there on product innovation that you can bring in. As I mentioned, Lean startups, just kinds of methodologies and processes. And these are kind of buzzwords, and everyone's trying to use them to help ensure that they're building a product that people really love. But as I mentioned, quite often, even with all of this, there's just something missing, something that isn't happening somewhere where so it's the product's been knocked off course. And so I want to talk about that, and I'm going to give, as I said, talk through some tools, talk through some examples, and hopefully, if I go through this quite quickly, there'll be plenty of time for Q&A where you get to ask lots of questions. So, products for all different kinds of people. If you're building a product for kids, it's very different than if you're building a product for the elderly. If you're trying to build something for the millennial, obviously there's many different factors you'll need to build in on your way to building a great product. So the first one of these concepts and frameworks that I want to talk through, because it is so useful, and when I see it being used effectively, it really helps mitigate many of the issues I'm describing, is design thinking. As I say, you may have heard of this concept. I find it incredibly helpful, and I think it's something that any product company should be investigating and see how you can apply these processes. And there's this great quote from IDEO, who have really been at the forefront of design thinking and taking that kind of creative mindset into products, which is why they've gone on to work with many of the world's great tech companies and many of the world's great engines of innovation elsewhere. So design thinking is a human-centered approach to innovation that draws from the designer's toolkit. So you start to really think about things as a designer and think about your product design early on. And the focus is really on the needs of people. And as I mentioned, lots of times when I see issues, it's because the product just doesn't resonate with the audience. They're not seeing the value, they're not feeling the value. And this is one way to make sure that you really understand the needs of people and the possibilities of the technology. So how can you use technology to meet the needs? What problem is it you're solving, and you're sure you're solving it in the best way? And the requirements for business success. It's a combining needs of people, technology, and business success. You have those three things aligned, you're probably going to be successful. And it's a really simple process, and it's a wonderful way to start. And yet so often I just see this step being skipped, and then we have to go back and we have to kind of collect the data that we should have been collecting early on. So as with any product, the focus is you're finding a problem or problems often, and you're trying to understand that problem and understand why it exists and understand the relationship between an individual, an organization, and that problem. So the best way to do that is to get out of your office and to go and listen and observe your users, or you can call those your potential customers. You have to get out. You're probably not going to be able to do this just with desk-based research, just by watching videos, just by calling people. You really need to listen and observe your potential customers and understand the problem that they're facing. It could be in a school, could be in a hospital, could be within a business, could be in many different settings. You're going to see enough of those people, so it's probably not enough to just go and see one or two. What you'll probably identify some patterns and some principles arising from that. If I go and speak to 20 nurses and I talk about electronic health records and what bugs them about them, or I go and speak to school teachers, or I go and speak to someone working in a finance department, or I go and speak to a recruiter about a problem I think exists. If I speak to 20 recruiters, I'd probably begin to get a sense on, is this just an issue for one organization, or is there something more generalizable there? So finding those patterns. And then again, this is one of those things I see not being necessarily observed and kind of followed through, is don't jump to conclusions on what the solution is too quickly. Come away from there and be very, very open-minded in terms of, okay, so there's clearly a problem that exists in this particular industry, in this particular segment. How might we go about solving it? What are they doing today? Have they got some kind of hack together in-house solution? What's the next best alternative to anything I may come up with? There's usually something else out there. Are there actually competitive products already in the market that claim to be solving this problem and aren't? And come away from that by thinking, okay, I'm going to just get a long list. Forget the short list at the moment, just get a long list of ideas, just get them down on paper. And if you can, get a short list together and then put something. It could be a wireframe, it could be literally a sketch on a napkin, it could be something that articulates what you think a potential solution is to that problem. And you want to get to that as quickly as you can. I'll show you some great examples of people doing this and kind of having a prototype to show without actually having to build something, that fake it till you make it kind of thing. But trying to represent your ideas, and then you go back out and you talk to people and you show them your ideas, and they say, well, that's great, but XYZ, or that's great, and A, B, C. And then you once again speak to more than one person, you get the feedback, you improve the idea, you do 2 or 3 cycles like that, and then you're probably in a position where, okay, I've got some decent sense on what this solution needs to look like. And at that point, it's probably not a bad idea to pick up a book called The Lean Startup, or to look into the Lean Startup methodology, or to just learn something about this. And the core focus around the lean piece is it actually gives you a framework to take that problem and turn it into a solution within a business context. So it's essentially a startup that it's focused on. It's a giveaway, it's in the name. And this organization, this startup, is going to wrap around this problem and put in place the resources and the skills and the structures and the processes that are going to allow you to turn that into a product. And the definition of a product is something that meets a want or a need. If it doesn't meet a want or a need, it's not a product. But as we all know, there's usually lots of uncertainty around there. I mean, you've been out, you've spoken to people, you think you've really validated it. Until you've really built it, there's probably a lot of uncertainty. Other people probably won't want to give you any money at this stage for your idea. So you've got to be really nimble and really able to kind of work through that. And what I really like about the Lean Startup is it definitely builds on that design thinking framework. And it's really about this idea of validated learning. So it's taking that initial idea on a napkin and turning that idea on a napkin into a wireframe, and then turning that wireframe into a super simple, very skinny prototype, and then turning that prototype into something a little bit more built up, and then getting to the point with something where maybe you've got something that you can give to a customer as a proof of concept. And you kind of go through this build, measure, learn, build, measure, learn, build, measure, learn kind of iterations. And it's a wonderful thing because you don't have to go too far, you don't have to spend too much time and energy and money before you're able to get a new learning and get an improvement out there. And in doing this, there's 2 really important concepts. And again, this is one of those things where I see a lot of companies who, what they've been doing is incrementing, and what they should have been doing is iterating. And I'll explain what those two ideas are, and you'll hopefully get to see why this incrementing idea is often problematic. So the thing with, I'm going to just put this up. The thing with incrementing is you have to be pretty sure what you're building. So you have to feel very, very confident that when you've gone out there and you've gathered these requirements, you understand the problem, you've got a good sense on the solution, you really are very confident that you know exactly what this needs to be, and then you can hire your engineers or hire your product developers or whatever it is you're building. You can start to build it a bit like a house. You're going to lay the foundation, then you're going to put the, in the basement, and then you're going to build the first floor, and then you're going to build the second floor, and then you know exactly how many windows you need to be adding. You know exactly what's going to go into each room. The problem is, with all this uncertainty that's out there, you better be sure that this is the right thing, because by the time you get to step 5, you've probably burnt through all your money. And if only at that stage you're going out to the market with your solution and you've got your little bit of money left because you've probably burnt through most of what you would have spent on marketing, you better be sure that people are going to want this. Otherwise, what comes after step 5 is often step 6, which is closing the company down. If you are someone who's genuinely a genius, you've understood the market, it can work, and I have seen it work for sure. But at least in my experience, the iterating model rather than the incremental model is a much better way to go. And the first thing is, you don't need to have such a clear sense of exactly what it's going to look like. In this case, this chap, this young painter, has got a vision of a woman in a pastoral setting. And what he's going to do is he's going to initially sketch that out, just like I described earlier, on a napkin, and then maybe get a bit of shading on it the next time they go out, and then maybe add a bit of colour, having heard back what people like and got a better sense of the adaptations that maybe needed to be added in step 4 and step 5. And really, this is a risk mitigation strategy, but it also just means that along the way you're able to pivot. You're tacking left and right, just like a dinghy in the ocean, and you can really be much more efficient with the resources, because you're not wasting things, spending lots of time and money and getting to the end point and finding people don't love your painting. Anyway, I think you probably get the point here. It's this validation that you can get from taking this kind of approach. And the thing with this iteration, and what I most love about this, is actually people think the idea is the single most valuable thing in a startup, particularly if it was your idea and it's your startup. In fact, quite often the initial idea is really overvalued. In fact, it doesn't even, it's good if it's a great idea. It doesn't have to be. It can be an okay idea. And then with this methodology, it's going out this build, measure, learn, build, measure, learn, build, measure, learn. And this iteration, you can just, subtly and in small ways improve it. And I always like this example. We improve this idea by 10% a week. 9 weeks in, it's at least twice as good as it was in week 1, just by going through this process. You go through this continuously for a year, you're going to end up with a 100 times better idea. So, you get my point. It doesn't need to be the perfect idea. It doesn't need to be the perfect solution. It really can just be something that you start with and you get going, and then you learn, and then you improve, and you build, and you go through that cycle. A couple of years ago, I've had a couple of occasions where I've got to meet some of the team at Google X, and it's interesting because the Google Glass definitely wasn't the perfect product. In many ways, it failed, but it got a lot of attention. And I met the team who were involved in conceptualizing it and actually developing the product. And they had lots of lessons about where they were not effective. But one of the things that they shared, and I took a photo on my phone at the time, was this image here. And this was on the very first day that the team came together to develop this idea. And what they did in their war room in coming up with this concept was to come up with this idea of putting information in front of people's field of vision, effectively putting it in front of your eyes without having to use your hands. And so they knew eventually it would need to be like a glasses type application, but they wanted to give this chap here, who you may recognize, former CEO of and co-founder of Google, the experience of what this would feel like to have information coming in to your field of vision from left and right. And so what they did on that same day was to hack together a small projector that's in the back here, a netbook or laptop that he's holding here, this coat hanger that goes round the neck and up here and forms this kind of screen where they've got this sheet protector here with a kind of a matte finish, and then this projector is essentially pushing the image onto this here so that he can view the image. So you get the sense of it very quickly. So rather than having to try and explain something or show a PowerPoint or show a napkin, to give people the sense of what this experience would feel like. And this concept of prototyping and finding the quickest path to the experience and moving away from making guesses is so important. I see so often where people don't want to take their idea out into the field. They don't want to put it in front of people because they're worried that somehow they'll judge it whilst it's in this incredibly messy state. Whereas actually the opposite is true. If you go out and talk to people, having spoken to them about a problem, and you come back with something as messy as this, they love it. They are engaged in it. They're going to give you lots of ideas. They're going to tell you what if it's an awful idea, if it's a great idea, how it can be an even more great idea, all that kind of stuff. So this testing and prototyping is so important. And again, it's one of those areas where I feel if more was done up front on that, more validation, more testing, more prototyping, we'd be so much more better off. We're taking questions at the end. I'm actually going to skip through Agile. It's interesting, but I don't think we need to cover it on this particular talk. So far, the takeaway. You have to get out there. You have to speak to customers. You have to speak to users. They won't be in your office. So in these times, they definitely won't be in your home. Obviously, getting out of the building is more difficult. Maybe we need to do it through, online Zoom sessions, but you need to be in front of customers, in front of users. You need to be sharing your ideas. You need to be validating things. You need to be thinking about how you can present the experience in the most effective way. The second thing is, as I mentioned, it doesn't need to be the perfect idea. It doesn't need to be the perfect product. You've just got to get started. And so another one of my big takeaways is, remember we talked about that long list of potential solutions to a problem? Well, you come up with a list of 20 different things. Even with only a 5% chance of one of them working, you have a 64% chance of success. If you come up with one idea and you put all your money into that one idea without validating it, and there's only a 5% chance of success, which is probably even that's probably high for the average startup, you only have a 5% chance. If you increase that to 50 things, or 50 versions, or 50 iterations, or 50 improvements of your original idea, you move up to a 92% chance of success. So, what's the takeaway from this? It's not about failing, it's about learning. It's about that validated learning. And again, so many startups, they've bet the bank and come up with the idea early, and they've not wanted to waver. And definitely there are some people able to do that, but generally a lot of the startups I meet have not been able to pull that one off. Takeaway number 3, and this is something I haven't talked about earlier, but I think it's definitely worth considering when you're thinking about either a business opportunity or a specific product idea that you have. It's this very simple 2x2 matrix that we all love, and that has on the left-hand axis has got the importance of the user need. How big a problem is this for the user? And the only way generally you find that out, you can try and do surveys, you can try and do other things, but generally it's getting out and talking to users. And then on the lower axis, on the bottom axis, how happy are they with the current alternatives or current methods for them to solve that problem? It may be something they had to build themselves in-house. If they love it, it's probably going to be hard to sell them on your product. If they just about live with it, okay, maybe there's an opportunity. If they hate it, or it's a competitor product or whatever, and they hate it, then maybe there's something good to go after. And the first thing I do here, as you see, is I draw this line, which is, if you really find problems where it's not you think it's a big problem, but they really don't think it's a big problem, well, it's probably not worth going after. You may argue, well, it's very easy, it's something quick, we can get it out there, but generally you're trying to find things that are really
Andy, can you go to StreamYard real quick and click hide so we can see the bottom?
sorry, I didn't think you could see that.
Perfect, thank you.
Can you see it now or not?
Yes, this is perfect. Now feel free to enter full screen mode again.
So what do? I go to
back to the PowerPoint. There you go. Perfect.
I thought it was just on my screen. No problem.
Thank you.
So that's user satisfaction with the current alternatives. Yeah, so this not worth going after area, the lower half of the 2x2 is definitely something to think about. Well, you can see here, if you look at the upper left, you've got, well, there's a high amount of user need. People, think this is a really big problem. They really, really, really want to solve it, but they're also pretty happy with the tools that are out there. Well, it's going to be pretty competitive. What you're really looking for is this opportunity space, which is where, lots of need and they're really not happy with what's out there already. And I can tell you from some very interesting recent experiences in that particular quadrant that people will put up with not a particularly great product. It doesn't have to look great. It doesn't have to perform great. It doesn't have to be beautiful. If it helps solve the problem, they'll pay for it, and you'll be able to build a business around it. And then eventually you'll be able to get it to being a great product and a beautiful product and thing they truly love. But they'll put up with a lot of not so good user experience, not so good product in many ways, if you really are helping them solve that need. Okay, so I've lost track of the time. It's about 30 minutes. And if there are questions, I'm very happy to take questions. If there aren't questions, I can always jump back into a few additional slides that I've got on other areas of this kind of product strategy, challenges that companies face. So,
there are questions, and one of them is actually, what is Agile?
Okay, so let me go through that. So Agile, where did I put my?
Oh, I'm putting you back.
Let me go back to. let me go back to the Agile base. Okay. So Agile is actually quite a lot of things, and it's used often in a the word is often used in kind of disingenuous ways, but essentially it's a process for organizing teams, and specifically product-based teams, such that they're able to, as I show here, collaborate daily. So it's a process that allows you to really iterate and learn, do that build, measure, learn, build, measure, learn, build, measure, learn in a kind of quite a structured way, to deliver frequently. So, we talked about this fast iteration. Let's not spend too long. So, you go out, you speak to customers, you come back, you share that with your colleagues in this daily collaboration. We're focused on small, defined tasks such that we can deliver something, so we can get back out there to our customers again and get their feedback and go through this, this process. And really, its core focus is around this, delivering working products and services. So the key piece is it's about teams at its core. And it really, really focuses on the individuals and the way they're interacting, the way they're sharing, the way they're working together. And it's very, very much focused on customer collaboration or co-creation, which is a wonderful thing. And again, that is because you're spending all this time listening and then sharing your ideas with your customers. You're not off, in the basement, just building something and not coming out sharing. And it's really about this responding to change rather than this iterating thing where we've got this master plan. We're going to, we know what the final painting is going to look like. This is something much more agile, which is where the word comes from. So we're able to constantly improve it, change it, refine it, and make it better. And the focus in agile is always on business value. It's always on that quadrant I was just showing you, finding really gnarly problems that are really of great importance to people, understanding why they're of importance, and really understanding how the user is going to interact with your product, creating stories around it as a mechanism to communicate that, going and talking to all the stakeholders involved in this. When you're building a product, you need to understand who the buyer is, who the user is, because often they're two different people. The one we always use when we, as a great example, is, remember the Nintendo Wii that was such a hit product? Well, who was the buyer? The buyer of the Nintendo Wii was mum, because it was generally focused on younger kids. Who was the user? Well, that was the kids themselves. And who was the technical support? Well, that was dad. And you need to understand all those different stakeholders. And it's the same in any organization. If you're selling software, you're selling hardware, you're selling other things. So in a nutshell, that's really what Agile is all about. And just to kind of close it all out, really, is the way these all fit together. You have design thinking, lean and agile. The design thinking is really the understanding, observing, conceptualizing, experimenting, and that gets fed into this loop of, the new ideas come in, we're iterating, we're building, we're going out, we're sharing, and you've got these kind of, double loops going on. So they definitely all fit together. And just as a final thing before there's any other questions, when this works together in harmony, the chances of success are so much higher. It's very, very hard, but almost without exception, when you go and look at companies who are struggling, products that are failing, some piece of this has been missed out. Often, actually, it's the earliest pieces. Sometimes it can be there's problems with the team and problems with the speed that things are happening, and they're not able to take the business requirements and turn them into technical requirements of the engineers know how to build it. We do run into challenges like that, but often it's something more fundamental.
Andy, what about when it's really expensive to prototype? So someone actually asked this question. I'm just going to read it to you. Question: MVP and iterations are great. However, they work best for some products like tech and software. What advice do you give to startups who have expensive, cost and labor-intensive products to build that are more expensive to prototyping? Example, lab-produced skincare.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I mean, well, what I can tell you is, at least in the hardware world, and I've got other friends who work in the fashion world, is that some of those costs now, with whether it's with 3D printing or other technologies that are now available, it's really brought down the cost of those prototypes. But maybe if it is some kind of I don't know, pharmaceutical or chemical-based product, or as you mentioned, some kind of maybe skincare product, I'm sure there are lots of issues around that. Having said that, there's been some incredibly successful startups. One of the ones that actually has intrigued me the most, and if this person is in the world of cosmetics, is Glossier. Glossier, I think that's how you pronounce it.
Yeah.
I mean, they've done an incredible job at kind of disrupting the Estee Lauders and the others. And the way they built that, starting with a blog, I've actually met the CEO and I've seen her talk at various events and stuff like that. They started that with a blog, and they started that with a really good understanding of customers' needs. And then only after, I can't remember how long it was, some period of time, did they actually move into the product space. They started off with a blog and a kind of learning and data gathering and understanding phase. So maybe that's something you can look at as well.
Yeah, I actually hear that a lot from people who say, well, I need money to build it. Is there ever a time where people can raise capital for a product they haven't really tested?
If you've got a track record, then the answer is generally yes. So if you've had 2 or 3 successful previous startups, then for sure someone's going to be willing to get the checkbook out and take a risk because you have that track record. Without that, it's pretty difficult. You can potentially go to the Kickstarters and the crowdfunding platforms.
Yeah.
Increasingly, they're pretty tough. And I've seen a lot of fail, and I've tried to help a few companies have failed in the process of trying to raise money early for that, because increasingly the investors or the potential customers understand the risk early on. And so generally you're talking about a friends and family type situation where you're trying to get it together, or savings, get a second job, get enough money together where you can hire an organization who you can work with to produce you a prototype. But no, it's definitely challenging. And for a first startup, if it's very capital intensive, you've got no track record, and it's going to cost you a lot of money to create a prototype, you need to think about that pretty carefully.
So let's say you do have a prototype. How do you go about building traction? And let me actually contextualize this, right? So let's say you are building a special pillow for individuals who are recovering from mastectomies so that they can sleep more comfortably, right? So you have one prototype. How can you get traction to prove that there is a need for your product to a point where you can raise the money you need to do it right and to potentially feed the demand, right? So let's say you've done a little bit of testing, right? testing at the market rather, right? You know, there's people who want this. You have people signed up on a waiting list, right? Would that be sufficient? Is there something else you can do?
So, I mean, great question. And having one of anything is always going to be challenging.
Yeah.
Because you need something to show people, and if you give it to someone and they start using it, then you no longer have your prototype to show people.
Yeah.
Definitely.
It's not like you sleep on it one night, then you give it to the next person, right? It's one of those things.
No, absolutely, absolutely. So we definitely need to get to a situation where you can have more than one. I mean, depending on what the manufacturing process is, maybe there's an opportunity there to form some. Well, you need to get buy-in from your manufacturing partner. So maybe you can at least get some samples at a heavily discounted cost on the basis that when you go into production, they're going you'll pay a slight premium, so they'll be able to recover their money. But in my experience, at least on the investment side, a lot of the time the investors want to experience the product. So I've done some work with a hardware technology company in the past, where at the end of every investor meeting where there was an interest, they said, okay, can we have a prototype to take away so we can test it ourselves personally? They wanted to have the experience of the product.
Yeah.
And not just look at renderings, even though they look beautiful or whatever. So you're definitely going to have to find a way and to raise sufficient capital or get those partnering relationships in place so you can get a few. But as I said, they definitely, the prototypes, if you're working with the right people, they don't need to be perfect, and they can be something that gives the user the 80% of the experience, and therefore you can produce it at a much lower cost. It doesn't have to be perfect. Now, some partners, customers, investors are going to want to see it in its finished state, but usually you can show them the renderings and the CAD drawings and that stuff. But for the prototype, it just needs to give them the experience of what it's going to feel like.
Here we have another question, and it's: do you have any advice for talking with investors? And let me just say something real quick. So Street Entrepreneurs is not in the business of getting companies funded. It's in the business of creating profitable companies. And if funding is a means to getting there, then by all means, it's something we will help people do. But if you can fund your business through pre-purchases, pre-orders, right? If you can figure out a way of getting traction and development, then do that, right? But there are some cases where you need a check as a seed round startup. You don't have friends and family. In fact, the majority of our entrepreneurs are people of color, and we know that people of color have less access to capital than white entrepreneurs, right? And one of the things we try and do is through Street Pitch, be that friends and family for the finalist.
Yeah.
But I'd love to hear your take on this.
Yeah. I mean, depending on where you are in the country, you're going to hear different answers. But in my experience, if you haven't got some kind of prototype and validation, customer validation, the ability for the investor to pick up the phone and speak to the potential customer, the user of the pillow, the company that works, the healthcare organization that would be willing to place an order for these pillows, or the patient user group who have been collaboration partners on the project to understand the size of the market, it's going to be very, very hard to raise money. So the further you can get along into this process, the more validation, the more people can pick it up, touch it, feel it, or if it's software, click it, scroll through it, the more you can show that experience, provide the validation from the users, the much more likely you are. I cannot think of a single example of a company I've worked with where the investors haven't wanted, even in the really early stage companies, pick up the phone and speak to the customer or the person that's running the proof of concept or the pilot or the user group, or some way to really validate that the market is genuinely there. So again, this prototypes, MVP type thing, you have to pretty much, in my experience, have that piece locked down. Of course, we all hear the stories of someone who had the PowerPoint deck and they went in and raised the money just on that. When I've done the root cause on those, generally it wasn't that straightforward. Maybe there was a family connection, maybe they had a prior track record, maybe they had an existing relationship. Generally, it wasn't just that deck that got them the money.
And times are changing,
yeah,
right? Because the fail, like the betting on a bunch of companies that are going to fail to just get the one ace is proven not to.
Yeah, that 5%, as I mentioned, is probably an optimistic.
Yeah. So speaking of MVPs, when someone asked about markets, and I was reminded about a conversation we had the other day when you were mentioning D-Day.
Yes.
And a minimum viable audience. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So one of the things generally that comes up in the first conversation with a new startup we might be working with is, who's the customer? And often they'll say, well, everyone, or some enormously broad market, some enormous market. This is a $50 billion market. We think we could penetrate 200 million homes in the US. And in the following breath, they say, and we're looking to raise 500,000 for a seed round. So you're going one sec. So you're going after a market with 200, enormous market, very broad, 200 million homes, potential market size, total addressable market, but you're only going to have $500,000. Well, the only possibility you're going to ever have of getting something out and launching it is to narrow it down enormously in terms of the entry points. Okay, so where are we going to begin within that? Who are the early adopters going to be? How can we define a really small audience? And in reality, particularly for these companies, let's start with 10 people, 10 companies, 10 of anything. Can we find 10? Which may be within your own social network, it may be within your own kind of community where you can start to reach those people. There's a great marketeer called Seth Godin. He talks about it as being the minimum viable audience. And with a startup, generally that actually starts with, can you convince someone else to join your team who believes in your idea? Just by finding a co-founder, you're going to improve your success rate immeasurably. Okay, so you've now convinced some other crazy person to join you in this adventure. Okay, so we're going to start by trying to find 10 potential users or people who can take the prototype, 10 people who can use the pillow, whatever it is. And the D-Day metaphor is really the Allied forces in World War II could have easily said, right, what we're going to do is we're going to try and take the whole of Europe. We're going to attack simultaneously in France and Spain and Italy and North Africa and all the, and out in the North Sea through Scandinavia. But they didn't. They chose to pick a tiny stretch of land in Normandy and to put all the might of the Allied forces through that tiny thing. And that's the same thing with a startup. You've got very, very limited resources and you're going to have to make maximum impact. So really pick the smallest, what we call the minimum viable audience, and focus all your resources on that audience. So those first 10 people, let's make sure they have an incredible experience.
Yeah.
When they pick, and then Those 10 will inevitably, if they love your product, lead to the next 5 and the next 10, the next 20, the next 50, the next 100. It's really just focusing your efforts on a very, very small audience to start with.
And I kind of feel that answers the next question, but I still want to ask it. So do you have any advice for entrepreneurs raising capital when they don't have a track record? How should they position themselves for success with investors?
Yeah, so it's always challenging is the first thing. But one word of advice I would get is, if you can get in there, what that gives you an opportunity to do is have a conversation where you get to explain what it is you are going to do and why you are passionate about doing this, why this problem is so important to you and why you want to solve it. And then what they get to do is effectively start the clock, because you're not asking them for anything. You're just telling them what you're going to do. And then what you do is each month when you're doing this, build, measure, learn, build, measure, learn, build, measure, learn, you're able to send them an email or drop them a line every couple of months and tell them about what you built, what you were able to measure, what you learned, and they're able to see the traction as you're moving forwards. And 6 months in, 12 months in, if they've seen this gradual, thought process evolving, you iterating and learning and the idea developing, it gives them so much more confidence in what you're doing that when you eventually do come to them to ask for some money, a check for $100,000 or $250,000 or whatever it is, you didn't just arrive out of the blue. You've been talking to them, you've had a relationship with them. They've seen you take your idea and turn it into something real, validated, something that people like, something where people see value. And that would be my starting point for a new entrepreneur. Now, you do have to get there in the first place, but that's part of the hustle of being an entrepreneur. You've got to find some way. Often you'll need an introduction. You've got to find someone who knows these people, someone who can get you an introduction. But when you do get in there, you're not asking for anything. You're just, essentially giving them an opportunity to start the clock.
So I'm also thinking about storytelling. So you told me the story about someone who raised a lot of money, and possibly storytelling played a huge role in it. What do you think makes a good story, at least from a startup perspective?
Yeah, it's so important. I was on a call earlier today with someone who's got a super interesting technology, and really, and they demonstrated it to me. We had a great demo. It's great. They're two technology guys, super interesting, but there's no story around it. There was no, why did they decide to spend their time developing this? What was the kernel of the idea? Where did it come from? And that has to be generally something personal. Yeah, it could be that you are founding a company to, some social impact company to reduce inequalities, or it could be, you've found a problem with public transportation that you really want to solve. Whatever it is, it needs to be a kind of a personal, passion-driven piece to the story to really get people to engage. Because if it's not, it's just another technology. It's just another thing that is just taking up your mind share, and generally you'll completely forget about it, versus someone who comes in and says, "Hi, I'm Juliana. This was some experience I had. This was some challenge my family faced. This was some issue I discovered when working with my clients. And I felt someone had to solve it, and that someone was me, because I couldn't see anyone else doing it. And there was probably no one better to do it, and no one who understood it better." That's so important.
So it really has to come from personal experience, or it helps if it does?
It certainly helps. I mean, if that's there, or you've been in a situation where you've observed this. You're someone, back to that skincare example, you're someone who's observed that with your particular skin type or your particular skin issues, there was no product on the market that was satisfying your needs. You hear these great, these great stories around companies. I think Dollar Shave Club have got some great stories around, shaving and men's facial hair and that whole thing. Most of these companies, when you dive in, there is a story piece there, and it needs to be genuine. I mean, if it's not genuine, if it's not authentic, people will see through that. And I've definitely seen a lot of pitches where they've tried to create a story around it retroactively rather than upfront. But it certainly helps for people to understand the problem if you're able to articulate it through your own eyes.
So what would you say are the biggest reasons companies fail?
I mean,
I know what you're going to say.
Yeah, there's so many. Listen, we tend to look at things through a product lens. But there's many other reasons. Obviously, there's all the personality issues, and often those personality issues don't come to the fore until the times get tough. When everyone's singing Kumbaya in harmony at the beginning of the company's life. Not so many failures due to that. Maybe failures due to picking the wrong market or burning through the money on things that didn't work. But when times get tough, I've seen and actually experienced, how hard it is to maintain those relationships. But generally, that pressure is caused by other factors in the business. And a lot of the time, when you really do the root cause, there was something off, particularly in product companies, with what they were building and the way they were kind of thinking about solving the particular problem they were going after, which led to sales issues, which led to financial pressures, which led to relationship issues, and on and on and on.
Yeah. So here's another question. I'm having a hard time figuring out my target market. Any advice? And Aslan, if you want to join the studio and share more details, you can.
Right. Yeah. No. Listen. That first segment, that first audience, is so important. If you just I'll give you an example. I'm in healthcare. A lot of the companies that I meet want to go and sell to insurance companies or want to go and sell to hospitals, both of which are unbelievably slow, cautious, conservative organizations. And you better have got a lot of money in place because it's going to take a long time. You're going to need to probably run a proof of concept for 1 or 2 years. And even when you get that and you think you're close to getting a signed deal, you've probably still got another 1 or 2 years in there. And I'll turn around to these companies and say, listen, you need to come up with a first version of this product which is focused on people paying out of their own pockets, patients, customers, end users, nurses paying out of their own pockets. Same in education. People want to make products to sell to school districts. You're probably best off creating a product where school teachers will pay out of their own product for your pocket for your product, because you'll be dead and gone by the time the school district gets around to giving you a purchase order. So you've got to think really, really carefully. And it may be that eventually, sure, you're going to sell to hospitals and insurance companies and school districts and schools, but you can't start there. So you have to think about this, this initial minimum viable audience, this initial people who can pay for your product. And you can have all the business plans and all the strategies for getting into these other markets, but you need to get to revenue quickly. You need to still be in business in 3 or 4 years so that you can enjoy selling those big deals to big organizations.
Yeah, at least even just to prove traction, right?
Exactly.
So start small, prove traction, then you can scale. So we always hear about like companies that just lose money for years and years and years until they become profitable or even revenue positive. Like how can they get away with that? What level of traction do they need to show to be able to do that?
Yeah. So right now, the markets, whether it's, listed companies on the New York Stock Exchange or NASDAQ, or it's venture capital backed companies, those that show very high levels of growth are very valuable. And if you are growing at an incredible rate, then you are going to be able to attract revenue. But those rates of growth are incredible. In fact, there was a company yesterday, Snowflake. I don't know if you saw, but if anyone saw it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Hit a record.
Oh yeah, it's unbelievable. I mean, and what were it was up 300% from the initial price it was expected to IPO at.
Yeah.
What was it that people wanted? Well, what they wanted was growth. What they were buying was growth. They weren't buying, and that's so valuable. Warren Buffett was one of the investors in the IPO, others, and what are they buying? They're buying growth. And so if you're able to get that growth, then sure. But if you're not growing at that rate, you're going to need to have, revenue and profit if you're going to be able to survive.
But it seems like it's catch 22. So you need capital to grow, but you
do need capital to grow.
We need to show growth to get capital. So
I still work with many people who have not raised a single penny of outside money. They have been able to generate something small and sell it, and then reinvest that money in their businesses. And for sure, it takes a lot longer. I spent 14 years working in a company, the one that brought me out here to the US. I was one of the co-founders of that company. We never took a single penny of outside money, in at least for the first 14 years.
Now, did you have capital to fund it yourselves?
There was it started out as a services company, and then it kind of morphed into a much more of a product-based company. And what we did was we took our services revenue, essentially consulting type revenues, and we reinvested the profits into products, so that because we knew that what we were doing for one or two customers on a one-off basis, we could turn that into a product and sell that to 50, 100, 500 organizations. But it took us a lot of time to figure that out and to have the money to be able to do that. But yes, you do need capital to grow. And if you want to grow quickly, you probably need to go and raise venture capital. But if you're more patient, there are other ways that you can organically do this.
Can we talk about the downsides of growing so quickly? What can go wrong?
Yeah, so many things. I was recently contacted by one of these organizations about a company in their portfolio who had raised $25 million and had a large team and were down to their last few 100,000, and they still didn't have any revenue, and the product still wasn't quite there. And what they had done was never been able to find, they had a great technology and they were off in search of the right market, and they went from market to market to market trying to figure this out. It was a pretty unique thing, and were never able to figure that out. And I definitely wasn't around in the early days. I mean, I come in right at the end of this, but in going through and talking with the team and talking with the investors and talking with people involved in this, it goes right back to that earliest phase of work that actually you can see here. This issue about there being a clear need, it was never really proven. What they had was a cool technology. $25 million later, they still hadn't found a clear need. And
wow,
that's kind of quite extreme, but that's definitely a big part of it. They had an incredible team. They had a lot of intellectual property. They'd come from academia. They had, they were really, really, really smart. But that earliest phase here was skipped in some ways. It was just like, this is so cool. Everyone's going to want this. And then they tried government, and government didn't want it. And then they tried various different sectors, and never happened. So,
yeah, you told me once that when you're brought in, it's either because one of the many reasons, but I remember too, they have a great product but haven't found a market, or they have a market but can't put together a product.
That's the two sides of the coin with startups, because startups are typically founded by one of two types of people. They're either founded by, I'll call them business people. And what I mean by that is there's someone who's identified a problem. They could be a doctor, could be a nurse, it could be a car salesman, it could be someone working in fast food industry, it could be anyone. But they've found a business problem that they really understand, and they know it's big, and they want to found a company to solve it. The flip side is the company's founded by, and this is the example I was just giving you, by technologists. So there's someone who has a solution or technology, and they're off in search of a problem. And both of those organizations have challenges. The business-led organizations often find that it's very hard to get the technology to align with the problem they've found, and they're not able to articulate it to the engineers in such a way that they can build it and get it solved. We see that a lot.
Wow, we could do a whole session on that.
Yeah, and the flip side is technical founders for whom the business side is, something that they just find incredibly hard to understand, and they're never able to really find a market. And the piece that sits in the middle, the bit that links the business requirements with the technology, what is that? That's product. That's where the product people exist. We sit between business and technology. And it doesn't have to be software. When I say technology, it could be materials, it could be chemical, whatever, but there's that. We're the people who link the two, because as I said earlier on, what's the definition of a product? A product is only a product if it meets a want or a need. If it doesn't meet a want or a need, the fact that you've built it doesn't make it a product. It just makes it a pile of code, a pile of stuff, a pile of chemicals. It's not a product unless it's meeting a need.
So let's say you built the product, a massive product with all sorts of bells and whistles, and you spend all of your savings on it, right?
Yeah.
But you're struggling to find the market. What's your first recommendation? Cut the fat?
I mean, it's the customer obsession piece. It's really it's always coming back to what problem are you solving, who are you solving it for, how are you solving it, and going back to that really fundamental work.
Mm-hmm.
And it all begins and ends there with what problem are you solving, who are you solving it for, and then how are you solving it. And if you skip over those steps, You may well have built something with all the bells and whistles in the world. You're going to be finding it incredibly hard to sell it. We talk about push and pull. Yeah, when you have a product that isn't meeting a really big need, isn't solving a big problem, you have to push really, really, really hard to get people to buy your product. You need lots of sales people, you need lots of marketing, you need lots of advertising, you need lots of everything. When you have a product that meets a really clear need and solves a big problem, it's a pull. I've seen it happen so many times. I've seen people who thought they had the right product. 2 years in, no one was buying it, no one loved it, nothing was happening. They finally figure it out. They put out their new version, their new product, their new thing. 2 weeks later, inbound. People are finding it, people are wanting it, people have heard about it. Completely different situation.
Here's a question that came in. How many features are too many features?
What we tend to find is that companies that are led by the technology folks rather than the business folks tend to overbuild. Likewise, companies that are led by sales focused people are also often overstacked with features.
Yeah.
I have a real bias that I like products that do one thing really, really, really well, rather than big, broad products, as you describe them, with bells and whistles, that do lots of things and don't do them all great, but it just makes life easier because it does everything. My own bias is to that single thing. And if you start with this MVP concept, what does the M stand for, Juliana?
Minimum. Minimal.
Minimal. And what does the V stand for?
Viable.
Right. So what's the absolute minimum you need to be viable? Nothing more, nothing less. The absolute minimum to be viable. If you start with that, you will often find it's a pretty slim product. People will say, well, that's more of a feature than a product. And we're like, well, yeah, but it's solving a problem and people will use it. And then what we're going to do is we'll gradually layer up more features in a very careful way based on feedback, as opposed to just these big bloated systems that, they're just overly burdened with everything, and where customers maybe are using 10 or 20% of it and the rest of it is completely meaningless. A lot of Microsoft products historically were like that. I mean,
do you remember the paperclip?
Of course.
I hated that paperclip so much.
Yeah. Even today, I mean, how much of Word do people ever use? It's interesting. I have a product. Do I have it on my desktop? Yeah. I know I can see it. I have basically like an editor. Essentially, it's not much more than the Notepad. It's a little bit nicer. And increasingly, I just write stuff in this, and then when that's done, I'll paste it into Google Docs or Word or one of the other products. So I didn't see it. Here it is. It's called Byword. It's one of my favorite products on the Mac. And when you open it up, you create a new document. This is what it looks like. That's it. That's the product. Byword. It's just an editor. And sure, you can add a few bits and pieces, but there's nothing in there. You can make it bold and italic, bigger and smaller. Sorry, my phone's going. But that's it. That's a great product to me. When I'm writing, all the other stuff, for me personally, it's just noise. I can easily just be formatting and doing this. But when I need to just write something, this is my kind of go-to.
Yeah, I don't even want to see grammar. It's like distracting. It's like 6 of the entire page is red. And anyways, but let's workshop this a little bit. Okay, so let's pretend I'm a company that is teaching education, and we are teaching about plants, right? So let's say we're helping little kids identify diseases on leaves, and learn about botany, and we're also helping them, you know, do the farm work. So it's like a two parts, right? So one is a software, like app you not software, but like an app you download that gives you the little kit so you can scan, um, the leaves, and the other is an actual box that gets mailed to people's houses with like plants they can plant, the soil, the equipment, all that stuff. And we've developed it, we've tested it, and we had some good feedback because we tested it with friends and family, and people loved it because they're friends and family. And now we're trying to get sales, and we are struggling, and we don't have enough money to keep both the app and the delivery box. How would I start thinking about picking one? It's like they go together, you know? It's like how do you even pick one? And I'm gonna pretend this is my business, Andy, so you can.
Yeah. So the first thing is, what problem are you solving?
We want to get kids involved in botany, and we want to get kids involved in agriculture. There's less farmers now than there were years ago. It's getting really hard to get the next generation of farmers. So we want to start young, teaching kids about nutrition and teaching kids about the food system and where their food comes from. And it's just, but we know that we also want to make it techy because there's such an obsession for parents, like, oh, my kid needs to do something tech. So we think like the app where they can scan leaves for diseases is actually kind of cool too, you know?
So that's the problem you're solving. Are you solving it for the teachers? Are you solving it for the agriculture industry? Are you solving it for government? Who are you solving this problem for? Are you solving all of them?
So we need more farmers in America. We need more farmers in the world, period. And we want to inspire the next generation of farmers. And we know that parents sometimes don't have time to teach their kids. So the app kind of guides the kids, you know, because it's like, okay, now plant the potato. Oh, is your potato sick? Scan here, you know?
Yeah. It sounds to me like, this is probably going to be a product where you need buy-in and stakeholders from different areas. I'd probably be talking to the people who really care about the curriculum at state and federal level to understand how what we're doing plays into those requirements, those curriculum requirements. I'd also be talking probably to folks in the agriculture industry. I'd probably be spending time with Cargill, the big, ag company, and Archer Daniels Midland, and all those.
We want organic farmers, Andy. Organic farmers.
Okay, so then I'll be off talking to the Soil Association and these other organisations who really care about this, because we want more, young organic farmers growing crops in small scale farms. And I would be trying to build out a value proposition that delivers to multiple stakeholders, such that the Soil Association are able to meet their goals, which is to grow the farming base, to reduce the costs of organic products and whatever else, such that they are, if not a customer of ours, definitely a sponsor, a backer, or someone. Maybe, they help offset the costs of the box that we want to send out. Maybe there's others who are in the seed industry, who are organic, who again are going to provide a revenue stream to allow me to offset my costs.
So are we
And
just
my instinct is, with something like this,
Yeah.
at least in the early days, probably I'm going to need the teachers to be buying into this. And ultimately, maybe I know quite a lot of teachers, they spend money out of their own pockets all the time on things for the classroom and things for the kids that are going to help improve educational outcomes and help make their lives more enjoyable and more interesting. And they
Teachers don't get,
spend hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dollars in doing that.
but teachers are poor and they're not getting the tax refund anymore.
I agree. And I'm not saying it's ideal.
So would you recommend just like mapping out all the stakeholders and then figuring out which one bites first to figure out which feature? Because
Well, personally, I'm hardwired to look for the win-win-win.
yeah.
So if it is something complex like this, I mean, personally, I would be probably trying to come up initially with an application that doesn't require the box and get that to the point where there's enough value that people are paying just for that. And then when we have revenues and profits from that, then expanding out, and not until we can do that. So I would say my hunch is the minimum to be viable doesn't include the box.
Because the box is more complicated?
And it isn't required in order to deliver value to the initial stakeholders. Eventually, we would love to add a box. But right now, we're going to have enough value in the app, the ability to scan leaves and share with our friends and post to social media and learn. And parents are going to see value because it's going to help their kids improve their grades on science, STEM subjects. And maybe our initial audience is going to be more wealthy parents. I'll give you another story. I don't know how long we've got, Juliana, but many companies try to develop an electric car over the years. Long before Tesla, people think they were the first one. They weren't. There were many companies who had an electric car concept before Tesla. Where Elon Musk's genius was, and he wrote this up in 2006, you can go and look this up. His strategy was, I'm going to make a very expensive electric car and I'm going to sell it to rich people. And then what I'm going to do with that money from the rich people is I'm going to make a less expensive car and I'm going to sell it to less rich people. And eventually I'm going to be in a position where I can actually do what I really care about, which is selling a regular priced family car to millions and millions and millions of people. And the difference between him and the others was they all tried to start by selling a family car at a low price, and every single one of them failed. And it's always resonated with me because, yes, you definitely want to reach, kids in the cities, and you definitely want to be able to reach the mass market and those 200 million people I talked about earlier. But you may have to start with a easier audience that's going to give you the capital and the traction to be able to pursue your dreams. So maybe what we do is we sell our product to more privileged kids in private schools who have the budget, and parents who have the budget, and then we're going to take that money, and then with their money we're going to start to create boxes and sell the boxes and the apps and subsidize them to others. And design thinking, lean and agile, will get you to that kind of solution if you put the right people in the room.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Andy, thank you so much for your time. And thank you for staying over to answer questions. I appreciate you.
My pleasure. It's been great. And
thank you for inviting me. Any last words of wisdom before we go?
I'll go back to this. Come up with lots of ideas. They don't have to be perfect. Try them. The more you try, the more likely you are to succeed. And get out of the building when we can.
Yeah.
Go talk to people. You're not going to do this from your basement or from your bedroom or from wherever you are stuck. You're going to have to speak to people. You're going to have to collaborate. So.
Yeah. Okay, I have more questions, but I'm just gonna let you go before I keep you over. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Have a beautiful day.
Yes. Thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you for being here. Thank you very much.